So my name is Kelly Andrews. I'm the CEO of Healthy Cities Illawarra, and I'm very delighted to welcome everybody here this morning on behalf of the Australian chapter of the Alliance for Healthy Cities. So if you don't know, the Alliance for Healthy Cities is an international network aiming to protect and enhance the health of city dwellers, and probably more so than just cities, communities. The head office is in Tokyo, Japan, and the Healthy Cities approach is based on the concept that the social and economic and physical environment is key to the health of people living in communities, and that many social and environmental changes are complex, they're intertwined, and they ultimately do affect the health of people. So the Healthy Cities approach encourages local government to consider and incorporate health issues in all public policy. And the Australian chapter is made up of like-minded city councils and universities and not-for-profit organisations such as University of New South Wales, Flinders University, Healthy Cities Onkaparinga, Kiama Council, Shellharbour Council, Logan City Council, Griffith University, the Canterbury Health Board in New Zealand, and of course Healthy Cities Illawarra. So Zoom provides us with an opportunity to broaden our reach this morning, and we're very glad to welcome, I think, over 70 participants online, and from what I'm sure will be very inspiring and engaging speakers. So just to formally welcome everybody and acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands in which, if you're not speaking, I can just hear some background noises, so maybe just make sure everyone's on mute. So maybe in the chat this morning you could just chat and let us know the country from which you're joining us, and that will help our own education and also get a breadth of who's joining us. So you will have received some information about this morning. The event will be recorded in Zoom, and a link will be available on our website in a few days. So if you don't wish to be recorded, then just ensure that you don't engage in the chat. We ask that you do use the chat to provide comments or ask questions, and I'll make sure that the speakers get a chance to answer the questions.
Kelly.
And if we're pushed for time and we don't get to answer everything this morning, I'll make sure that we somehow provide some answers in writing afterwards, after this morning. So we have three amazing speakers that have been very generous with their time to share with us this morning. And I'd firstly like to introduce Professor Ian Lowe. Okay, we're just getting some messages in chat saying there is quite a lot of background noise. So can everyone just try and mute their audio?
Kelly, it's Talia. I don't know who that is, but you could probably mute them from your end if you're the host.
Yes, and I actually thought I did that. So I might just take a minute and make sure I go back in and check that.
Ah, there we go. She's muted. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. So Professor Ian Lowe is Emeritus Professor of Science and Technology and Society at Griffith University and an adjunct professor at two other universities. Not sure which ones they are. He has published extensively over a very long career and filled a wide range of advisory roles for all levels of government, including chairing the advisory council that produced the very first independent national report on the state of environment in 1996. And I wonder how much has changed. A fellow of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering since 2005, and the International Academy of Sciences, Health and Ecology recently awarded him the Conrad Lorenz Gold Medal for his contribution to sustainable futures. So we're very glad to welcome you, Professor Lowe, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and get rid of my face so we can hear from you.
Ellie, I'm trying to share my screen.
Yep, we can see it. Just need your presentation.
Yes, would help. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. The other two universities at which I have adjunct appointments are Flinders University of South Australia and the University of the Sunshine Coast. And I probably should also confess that I'm now on the board of Health and Wellbeing Queensland, which is a new statutory body trying to improve public health and reduce demand for healthcare services. I also want to begin by acknowledging that I'm on the land of the Gubbi Gubbi people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. That's become a bit of a ritual, and most people now remember to acknowledge the traditional owners, but it should be more than a ritual, because the original Australians worked out over tens of thousands of years how to live sustainably in this harsh and unforgiving continent. And they embodied those knowings not just in custom and practice, in song and dance and ceremony, but also in their system of laws. And if we aspire to be a sustainable society and have sustainable, healthy cities, we need to move to that level of understanding the limits of the natural systems of this continent and embedding those knowings, not just in custom and practice, but also in our system of law. And we need to achieve reconciliation with the original Australians, starting with acceptance and acknowledgement of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and the belittling of that by successive governments is a national shame. We need to recognise that the lifestyle of the original Australians was disrupted by what they found to be a wave of illegal immigrants, as Moya put it, and acknowledge the past harm done to them and move forward together. Let's start with a fundamental point. Future is not somewhere we're going, it's something we are creating. There are many possible futures, and which one emerges will be the consequence of our actions as individuals, as members of households, members of communities, members of organisations. From that wide range of futures, we should be trying to shape one that is, at least in principle, sustainable, able to be sustained, if not forever, at least for the foreseeable future. Because living in a way that is not sustainable is essentially stealing from our own descendants, the moral equivalent of tiptoeing into their bedroom at night and raiding the money box to get some money to go to the pub. And that's a level of morality that not many of us would stoop to. Now, it should not be contentious to say that we're aiming at a sustainable future, because COAG, the Council of Australian Governments, adopted nearly 30 years ago a national strategy for ecologically sustainable development. So in principle, all governments, state, territory and Commonwealth, Coalition and ALP, are committed to a path of economic progress that does not impair the welfare of future generations, to striving for equity within and between generations, to recognising the global dimension of our actions, protecting our unique biological diversity, trying to maintain ecological processes and systems. I think it would take a very generous assessor to detect any sign that recent governments even know there is a national strategy for sustainable development, let alone see that as the guardrails within which we should be making our day-to-day social and economic decisions. And how are we doing? Well, the answer is not very well. The UN 2015 report on progress towards sustainability ranked Australia 18th out of 34 OECD nations, just below the halfway mark, below Canada and New Zealand, below even the UK. And it rated us among the worst in the entire developed world on resource use per head, waste produced per head, greenhouse gases per unit of economic output, and the obesity rate. And we're well below average on the level of poverty, the degree of inequality, the gender pay gap, and the percentage of women in elected office. Interestingly, the four nations that are doing best in terms of progress towards sustainability are the four Scandinavian nations: Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. The USA ranks 33rd out of 34, and it's passing strange that so many of our decision makers see what is looking increasingly like a failed state as the model to which we should aspire, rather than the much more successful Scandinavian nations. let me set out what I believe is the criteria for sustainable, healthy cities. They will need to have stabilised their population and their per capita consumption so that the total demands of the human population are within what natural systems can sustainably provide. And that means that renewable resources like stocks, forests, bushland, groundwater are not being overused, that there is clean air, or at least air that is clean enough not to represent a health hazard. There are secure supplies of essentials like food and water. The local biodiversity will be conserved. We will have done our bit to stabilise the global climate, and they will have achieved a much greater degree of social equity than now applies, where it remains true, as Barry Jones remarked when he was Science Minister, that the best chance of your life success in Australia is the care with which you chose your parents' postcode. And that marks you for life because it influences your chances of getting a good education, your chances of getting good health care, your chance of living in a stable community, getting a good job, and so on. How are our cities doing? Well, Manning did a survey of the top 10 sustainable cities in Australia for Green Lifestyle magazine last year. And basically what it summarised was the least poorly performing of our cities. Some have redeeming features. For example, Brisbane, Darwin and Townsville score well for biodiversity conservation. Sunshine Coast, where I live, has the best air quality of any urban area. Canberra has a good commitment to renewable energy and a lot of green buildings. Melbourne has a lot of low carbon developments. Cairns has the lowest level of car ownership of any city. But they all have problems. Darwin has a large ecological footprint and poor community health. Brisbane and Canberra rely heavily on cars. The Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast are expanding rapidly and losing natural areas. Sydney and Melbourne are expanding peri-urban settlements with poor facilities. And almost all our cities are increasing their carbon footprint. What we're seeing at the urban level is a local demonstration of a global problem that was identified nearly 50 years ago in the first report of the Club of Rome, The Limits to Growth, which said that if the trends of growth in population, resource use, industrial production, agricultural output and pollution were all to continue, we would reach limits to growth within 100 years. And the likely outcome would be economic, social and environmental decline starting about 2030. It also said that those trends were not inevitable and that it would be entirely possible to redirect the trajectory of human development onto a path that would be sustainable into the distant future and would allow every human to exercise their full potential, however carelessly they chose their parents and where they lived. But that better trend would require conscious policy decisions rather than closing our eyes and trusting the magic of the international market. Dr. Graham Turner of CSIRO recently compared the limits to growth projections with 40 years of data from 1970 to 2010 and found that on all those key parameters, we are tracking the standard run, which leads to economic and ecological collapse before 2050. The fundamental problem is that most of our cities are still committed to expansion and in principle to unlimited expansion. This is perhaps an extreme example, what Peter Spirit called the 200-kilometre city and what I christened Noosa Gatta, the urban sprawl from the Noosa River to the New South Wales border with only one tiny remaining little green patch interrupting that continuous urban sprawl. We need to accept that fundamental issue that there are physical, ecological and social costs of expansion. There are, of course, legitimate differences about where those limits lie, but unless we accept there are limits and have a mature debate about where those limits lie, we are going to run into problems and we have no possibility, even in principle, of having sustainable urban areas. We are now seeing obvious problems of growth of our cities. All of our cities are losing natural areas, and in all of our cities, infrastructure is failing to keep pace with the growth in the population. And that's quite a fundamental problem. It was identified by Lester Thurrow 30 years ago, and calculations by Dr. Jane O'Sullivan of the University of Queensland illustrate the fact that the rate of growth of income of urban areas is roughly proportional to the growth in population, but the demands for infrastructure are growing much more rapidly than the income to provide it. Essentially, a population growth of 2% doubles the requirement for infrastructure spending, but it only increases the rate base by 2%. And the problems are obvious. There is an accurate perception in all of our cities that quality of life is being eroded because infrastructure isn't keeping pace with the population growth. And of course, the provision of natural areas cannot keep pace because it can't increase. In fact, it's diminishing as natural areas are being sacrificed to meet the short-term needs of the growing population. And all of our urban areas are committed to growth. In fact, I recently saw that Adelaide leaders are lamenting the fact that their growth rate is lower than that of many other cities, and so their quality of life is not being eroded as fast as other cities. They see that as a problem rather than a cause for celebration. Let me identify some critical issues. In terms of food production, when I came to southeast Queensland, there were large areas of orchards and market gardens in the southern suburbs. They've now mostly been concreted over for housing because in the short term, the economic value of housing is greater than the return from using it for food production. But because they're losing productive areas, we have longer and more precarious supply lines to produce the food needs of our city. In terms of water, there are obvious storage limits. It's increasingly difficult to build new reservoirs or extend the existing ones because of the accurate perception that there are social and environmental costs, and the increasing unreliability of rainfall means that water supply is a critical problem for some of our urban areas. Air quality is a fundamental limit on expansion. I attended a conference on sustainability for China and the world a decade ago, and the Chinese leadership acknowledged that their cities are now facing critical social problems with air quality limiting health. In fact, a recent calculation suggested that pollution from exhaust emissions is now causing a greater shortening of life expectation than the deaths and injuries due to accidents on the road, which are so depressingly predictable we call it the road toll, as if there was no way of avoiding it. In terms of transport, we now increasingly have two-tier cities where the inner urban areas have good local facilities that are in walkable neighbourhoods and good public transport, but the peri-urban expansion has poor facilities and no possibility even in principle of decent public transport, entrenching disadvantage for generations. And finally, we are losing our natural areas, losing biodiversity and increasing greenhouse emissions in all of our cities. Let me just say something about climate change. It is true, as the denialists say, that there have been warmer and cooler periods in the past. The Holocene optimum and the medieval warm period where the Vikings in Greenland were warmer, and the Little Ice Age in Europe when the Greenland community collapsed was colder. But if you look at the scale on the left, those excursions are only about 1/2 to 3/4 of a degree above or below the happy medium of the last 10,000 years. 10,000 years of climate stability that have enabled us to increase food production and expand the human population. We are now 1.1 degree above that average of the last 10,000 years and heading north at a rate of knots. And it's causing a range of problems, not just more very hot days, more extreme weather, but interruptions to rainfall and water supply. This graph from the WA Water Corporation shows that the annual inflow to Perth's water supply system from 1910 to the present day. And the critical point is that the average since 1975 is about half the average before then, and the average since 1995 is about 1/3 of what it was before 1975. And the citizens of Perth are only able to continue profligate use of water to maintain lawns and gardens that would not naturally survive in that climate, because they have desalination plants and are using groundwater. To summarise what we need to do to respond to climate change, as Antonio Guterres pointed out to the UN just a couple of weeks ago, to have a better than even chance of keeping global average temperatures rise below 2 degrees, in other words, below double what we've already experienced, the world needs to be emitting 45% less carbon dioxide by 2030 with rapid further reduction. So emissions everywhere need to decline rapidly from now, and it's just irresponsible to be talking about new coal-fired power stations or new gas plants when we need to be phasing out as rapidly as we can those we already have. As the world scientist warning to humanity said just a few years ago, to prevent widespread misery and catastrophic biodiversity loss, we have to practice a more environmentally sustainable alternative to business as usual. Soon it will be too late to shift course away from our failing trajectory, and time is running out. And in case you think that it's only scientists and ratbag greenies who are saying that sort of thing, the World Economic Forum, which is the big end of town at the global level, held a summit on the global agenda in Dubai 12 years ago. And in the final statement, they said that the recent crises were the canaries in the mine, the early warning signals that our current economic system is simply not sustainable. As Peter Victor put it in his influential book, Managing Without Growth, showing how we could move to stabilise population and economic output, he said there are feasible economic alternatives. Getting to them will be beyond us unless we change how we think about our economy, society and environment, undertake some close reflections on what's important to ourselves in others, including other species, and develop a readiness to rethink and transform much of what we have taken for granted. We really need a new set of values. Dr. Paul Raskin, who heads the Telus Institute in Boston, argues that the values that have driven human development for the last 100 years have been domination of nature, individualism, and consumption. And he argues that we need to replace that unholy trinity with a new triad of values. The domination of nature needs to be replaced by the notion of ecological sensitivity, an awareness that natural systems have limits and a willingness to live within them. Consumerism, the idea that we are more fulfilled if we have so much stuff that we can't fit it inside the largest new houses in the world and have to rent storage space outside, it needs to be replaced by an emphasis on the quality of life, the quality of the human experience, rather than the acquisition of stuff. And finally, individualism, the idea that we can all do our own thing, needs to be replaced by a recognition that we're all in this together. Climate change is the ultimate manifestation of the fact that we share a destiny with the rest of the human population, and we need to work towards global sustainable solutions. In terms of a model, about 30 years ago, I was at a conference about the sustainability of Sydney. And the then New South Wales Premier, to show that he wasn't just a pragmatic fixer, but thought about these things, put up this slide saying sustainability is about living within our means, balancing the economic, environmental and social outcomes. And there is his Venn diagram, the environmental, healthy society, competitive economy. I said that I thought the problem was that the implicit Venn diagram most politicians have is what I've called the pig-headed model, in which the economy is the main game, like the face of the pig, and society and environment are minor protuberances like the ears of the pig. And they actually believe that as long as the economy is going gangbusters, our social and environmental problems can be solved. And of course, that's a fatuous view because no amount of wealth will bring back an extinct species or repair global climate on a reasonable human timescale. In fact, markets give us things that many of us want, but the fact that the economy is in crisis because during the pandemic we're only buying things that we need is a dramatic illustration of the fact that much of what's produced we don't actually need and have to be persuaded to want. By contrast, natural systems give us the things that we absolutely need: breathable air, drinkable water, the capacity to produce our food, as well as things that are quite important, like our sense of place, our cultural identity, security, companionship, and love. I tell people if you look at the Earth from space, you can't actually see the economy. You see some of the natural features we used as boundaries for polities, like oceans and mountain ranges and rivers. And if you start from that view, you come up with a much more rational Venn diagram. It recognises the economy as a subset of society, a very important subset to be sure, but it's only a subset. And our society is totally enclosed within and totally dependent on natural systems. We tend to think of humans as somehow superior to the natural world, but we are just as dependent on natural systems for our provisions and for managing our waste as our gum trees or galahs or goannas or garfish. Now, even in a friendly group like this, I can imagine a few people thinking that this is a bit utopian, talking about managing our social and economic development within the limits of natural systems. And at one level, it is utopian. But I wanted to end by reminding you that all of the significant advances throughout human history have been seen as utopian when they were proposed. 200 years ago, it was utopian to be arguing for the end of slavery. 100 years ago, in most societies, it was utopian to be arguing that women should be allowed to vote. That's ancient history, I hear you say, and it is. But only 30 years ago, it was still utopian to be dreaming of Berlin without the wall, or South Africa without apartheid, or an apology to stolen generations, or an African-American being elected US president, or female political leaders, or such modest advances as good coffee and civilised licensing laws in Queensland. In fact, if you think about it, practically all features of modern life were once utopian visions. And we have them because people in previous generations did not assume that they lived at the zenith of civilization and worked purposefully for a better world. And where their working had a moral dimension, it was more likely to succeed and change our culture. So the obvious problems for our cities, the presumption of unlimited growth, increasing per capita consumption, as a result of those combined features, the loss of natural areas, increasing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing inequality, and the absence of a long-term vision of how a future stabilised population might be sustainably supported in balance with what natural systems can sustainably provide. Despite COAG, there is no overall vision or national plan to live within the limits of natural systems. A priority has to be addressing the driving forces. So we should have long-term goals of stabilising our urban populations and moving towards a steady state economy rather than assuming growth can go on forever. That will only be socially sustainable if there is more equitable access to essential services. But the fundamental point is that we have to live within our means. I'll end with a picture of my 5-year-old granddaughter at one of the school demonstrations against climate change, urging us to care for our world. Thank you very much.
So many buttons. Thank you so much, Professor Lowe. That was amazing. That was very overwhelming in parts, and I was so glad to get to the utopian slide because it was a nice, refreshing reminder that despite the doom and gloom and political unwill, that these things can be changed given enough people power and people of like-minded organisations such as ours today to put our heads and together to do something. So I was really glad to see that utopian slide, and I really also loved the Venn diagram again, that that ecology, that flipping things on its head. I think I'm going to reuse that. That was really easy to refocus, I think, when you saw the ecology, society and economy last. And I remember living through the bushfires thinking, surely this is enough to get people to change, and I don't know if it is, but we will keep going. Now there's a few little things I can see have popped up in the chat. No questions so far, they're just thanking you for your presentation. Are there any questions at all from the floor?
Well, I'll just reinforce what you said. Historically, change happens when enough people want change badly enough. And I'd like to think that the unprecedented bushfires of 2019-2020 will be the catalyst that it's becoming increasingly impossible to deny the reality of climate change. And the good news is that renewable energy supplies like solar and wind are now readily available and inexpensive. And we saw a moment of history on the 11th of October when, for an hour between 11 and 12, the state of South Australia was entirely powered by solar energy, 100% solar, 73% rooftop solar and 27% solar farms. So for decades we've been told that there are limits on how much renewable energy you can use. The grid will be unstable if you have more than 25%. It's all bullshit. With good planning, you can live on 100% solar and wind, and we just need government to get out of the way and let that trend of technology that's being driven by householders putting panels on their roof and energy companies investing in solar and wind, let them get on with converting our energy supply to clean systems.
Absolutely. I agree. I saw on the news last night that ANZ were starting to pull back their investment in any coal mines and kind of fossil fuel companies. So I think it, you know, despite governments, I think it could be the business end of town that might end up driving this.
Yes, because that's economically rational. I mean, hard-nosed accountants can see that there is no financial future in thermal coal. That if you invest in building a coal mine, you're assuming people are going to still be burning coal in 30 years' time. And if you believe that, I'd like to know what you're smoking and where I can get some.
We do have a question from Gwyn Jolly, who's Healthy Cities Onkaparinga, and she says, what can healthy cities and communities do to convince our so-called leaders?
That's a very good point, Gwyn, and I relate to Healthy Cities Onkaparinga because my late partner built a beach house at Sellex Beach and spent many happy summers in your part of the world. The old saying is when the people lead, the leaders eventually follow. I think and what we're seeing in terms of energy suppliers, the people are leading. They are moving towards solar energy, they're moving towards wind farms, and leaders are being dragged kicking and screaming along. I think the only thing that scares politicians is the possibility they might not be re-elected. And I think if we see an increasing trend, I mean, the ACT elections or the 6 Green people, Green members elected, I think, I mean, that was the community showing the elected leaders that they want more serious action about problems like climate change. And I think that the 2 things we can be doing is writing letters and sending emails and sending delegations to elected leaders, because sometimes when I ask them why they aren't doing more about climate change, they say they get more letters expressing concern about hospitals or roads or tax system than they do about climate change, and it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. So you know, you can't complain about politicians ignoring you if you don't badger them about these issues. But I think the one thing that they're increasingly getting concerned about is the increasing Green vote. It means that people who were historically rusted on to the major parties are increasingly saying responding to climate change is more serious than growing the economy, and we want to see that as the first priority.
And there's a related comment / question sort of around that. This has come from Nick from Kiama Council, and his contention around the vested interest in politics and sort of political donations, I guess, and have fully publicly funded elections. He's interested in your thoughts on that.
Oh, I agree, absolutely. I mean, I don't believe that fossil fuel corporations are making donations to political parties out of philanthropy. I don't believe that they're doing it just because it gives them a warm feeling. I think that they expect something in return. And as long as we allow corporations to fund political campaigns, they will expect something in return. Yeah. So I believe we should ban corporate donations to political parties, and I believe we should publicly fund elections and publicly fund them at a modest level so that we're not bombarded with propaganda. I mean, at the moment, I'm being bombarded with ordinary text messages from Clive Palmer's corporation claiming that if the Queensland Labor government is returned, there'll be a 20% death tax, even though there is no evidence at all that this has been seriously proposed. I've had 3 text messages in the last 48 hours repeating this lie and urging me to vote for Clive Palmer's discredited political party. So I think we should ban both political donations and use of social media to spread what are blatant mistruths.
Yeah, interesting. Good points. We've probably got time for 2 last questions that are here. We've something from Fran around extinction rebellion tactics that aim to confront people much more than other environmental movements.
Well, I mean, historically, the abolitionists or the suffragettes engaged in measures that were illegal to draw public attention to what were immoral activities, enslaving people or denying women the vote. And I entirely understand people going to extremes and bending the law to express their frustration and get attention to their cause. I haven't personally been arrested, but I admire people who are prepared to be arrested as a manifestation of their determination to effect change. I particularly admire the school children and their climate change demonstrations, because they understand that we're talking about their future. And most of our decision makers won't live to see the worst of the consequences of their inaction on climate change, but 5-year-old school children will. On average, they'll live to the end of the century, and they're going to see 3 or 4 degrees increase in average temperature, which will mean 10 degrees increase in temperatures in central Australia, which will mean whole areas will be just unlivable. And they're understandably concerned. I think we should support them.
And that's actually a really nice way to lead into our final question, which comes from a young person, a student, secondary student we have tuning in from Edmund Rice College. He asks, do you think that the government is adequately considering the impacts of negative externalities, for example, fossil fuel dependencies, and what can we do to hold up cities in the Illawarra moving towards a more sustainable future?
Well, I think the heartening thing is that because local government is much closer to the community, more people know their elected councillor than know their member of parliament. Local government in general has been much more proactive. A lot of cities have zero emissions target. A lot of cities are investing in better public transport, in conservation of natural areas. So I think we should encourage those local decision makers who are doing good things and try to build support for their action. I mean, the heartening thing about the United States is during the darkest 4 years of human history, with Trump in complete denial about climate change, something like 280 US cities have zero emission targets and are investing vigorously in clean energy. But the federal politicians who are still in denial are just being left behind and made to look increasingly irrelevant. That couldn't happen to a nicer bunch.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful discussion. Thanks everyone for your questions. We might move on to Cherie now. So I'm going to get rid of myself and we'll wait for Cherie to share her screen. Actually, I won't get rid of myself. I might introduce Cherie. Cherie is a senior environmental advisor at BlueScope'S in Port Kembla. She's over 18 hours, you would imagine a little bit longer than that, 18 years experience in the air quality monitoring and environmental management area, and began her career as an air quality testing officer, conducting stationary source emission sampling in air quality. She's conducted stack testing services at Port Kembla for about 8 years. In 2011, Cherie moved into her current role, where she's responsible for providing environmental governance to line managers, overseeing regulator interactions, maintaining systems to meet standards, conducting environment management system audits, and providing technical advice in relation to environmental issues to plant managers, and actively promoting and being involved in environment improvement projects, which result in reducing the environmental footprint of the operations. And it's really exciting to hear from Cherie because it's going to, I've seen her presentation and it's just so practical. The steps that industry are taking, as Ian said, we're all in this together. And I'm really excited to introduce Cherie. If you're there, you can, there she is, and I'll get rid of myself and you can take over.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this forum. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to focus my presentation today on reduced waste to landfill and how persistence and key personnel play an important role. So I'll just talk about BlueScope Steelworks, just for those that are unaware of what the site is. So the Steelworks is located on the east coast of New South Wales, about 90 kilometres south of Sydney. The Steelworks is an integrated plant where all three major phases of production, we've got iron making, steel making and hot rolling, take place on our site. The current annual production rate is approximately 3 million tonnes per annum. and form of steel slabs, hot rolled coils, plate, and downstream value-added products. The site has approximately 4,500 employees and contractors on site, so it's quite large. And the site occupies 10 kilometres squared. It's bounded by the Pacific Ocean and Inner Harbour on the east. There are residential areas on the south and the west, and we have a grain handling and coal terminal to the north. Some of the BLUESCOPE'S products that we make, there is a lot of companies that we own and operate with manufacturing and building solutions. Here are some pictures of some of our steelworks products that we make. You've probably seen them around, especially COLORBOND fences. Now that's a common one. The sustainability report that BLUESCOPE releases every year, the last one was released in late September this year. And I'll just read you an excerpt from that report. BLUESCOPE is committed to protecting the environment. We operate our facilities with due respect for environmental laws. Our facilities worldwide are regulated on environmental matters by local authorities and report environmental performance data as required by our site licensing agreements. Most of our operating facilities, we actually maintain an ISO 14001 certification for our environmental management systems. This provides additional assurance that our approach is not only suitable and adequate, but it is effective. BLUESCOPE supports the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, a call for global action that aligns with our efforts to drive sustainable business outcomes. We have aligned our sustainability outcomes to relevant sustainable development goals throughout the report. And the report is, there's a link to the report there in my presentation if you have access to the presentation at the end of today's forum. But also if you just go online and search for BLUESCOPE, the sustainability report is available publicly for everybody to read. I'll just go into some of our environmental targets and metrics. So our view towards sustainability, it includes developing, manufacturing and selling steel products and solutions in a manner that provides for an environmentally sustainable future. This requires a focus on continuous improvement and adoption of new operating methods and products. Continual improvement plays a vital role in every employee's role objectives here at BLUESCOPE. Every department has an objective to ensure that a minimum of one waste, water or energy project is implemented and completed within a financial year. So currently, this financial year, if we just talk about waste projects diverted from landfill, there are 31 registered currently. Last financial year, there were 81 projects completed, which diverted approximately 3,200 tonnes of waste from landfill. BLUESCOPE operates within a circular economy, with our manufacturing processes being optimised to minimise our use of resources, reduce waste and reuse or convert waste material into other valuable products. This approach promotes a circular economy, preventing waste materials from going to landfill. In FY20, around 2% of our outputs from our steelmaking facilities were classified as waste, requiring disposal. So this meant that most of our byproducts are recycled, reused or repurposed. Our targets for this financial year is to ensure that we reduce our landfill rate by 10%, going off our last financial year's baseline. Now into the interesting stuff. So I've got some projects that I've been fortunate enough to be part of, and these took place over the last couple of years, with many more to come in the future, definitely this year as well. So the first one I want to talk about is just a simple one, but very effective. So we have a Western Sydney service centre. It's a paint line located west of Sydney, and it's been operational since 2010. So it's not very old at all. And there are about 80 employees there. You can see the photo there I have. It's of the main lunchroom in the main building. So the current state was just the one bin. And there were multiple streams of waste being sent to landfill. And there was a big opportunity here to look into this and see what we could do to reduce, obviously, the waste going to landfill. So the plan was that we would conduct a series of audits. And for this, the EPA actually have a bin trim program in place where you can utilise an auditor to come on site and assist you with not only the audit of the waste streams, but to assist you with some solutions. So what we did too, we formed a team of representatives so we could have some on-site help. The more the merrier really in these projects to ensure success. I also wanted to make a big thing on educating and making the employees aware of what the waste streams are that were going to landfill and how we could fix this and how we could improve this. So the results speak for themselves. I mean, as you can see there in that photo, we've got some new bins in place and some clear signage. So overall on the site, we put 41 new bins in. There are a lot more paper and cardboard bins now available. And the great thing I found with the paper and cardboard bins is that the company that takes away the paper and cardboard also accept clean, wet or dry paper towel. So paper towel, you know, in the bathrooms and you dry your hands and the paper towel is really clean because your hands were clean. And this is actually recyclable. And a lot of our waste stream was paper towel. So also in addition, we put commingled recycle bins in, you know, with your bottles and your cans and your tins and cardboards and stuff like that, milk cartons. So that was awesome because we never even had that. We put in compost bin for organics and also set up a return and earn scheme where you get the 10 cents per bottle and we donate that to a charity. So for only doing that project, it didn't actually take long, it was only a couple of months to implement. We actually resulted in a reduction of 27.7 tonnes of waste being diverted from landfill. We increased our recyclables by 22%. And I found by having clear signage that's not busy, very easy to read, was really effective in ensuring that employees knew what to do and how to do it. So the next project I want to talk about is timber pallets. Timber pallets on site are single use. They are placed in timber bins for mulching or landfill. Also on site, our departments will purchase externally second-hand pallets when required for use. The plan was to identify and locate a company that was local who could collect and reuse the pallets. Because a lot of the times there's nothing wrong with these pallets at all. They were just delivered on site with materials, refractories, items on them that we needed to use and then just disposed of. So I also had to identify which departments across the site had pallets and were willing to participate in this amazing project. Results again speak for themselves. You can see we've had 3 years running and it's going to continue right into the future. But if we just go off last financial year, you can see we actually avoided 235 tonnes of pallets being sent to either landfill or being mulched. In addition to this, the site would have purchased 1,500 pallets externally. And at about $30 to $40 each, we would have repurchased some more pallets. Instead, we reused the pallets we had on site, so 1,500. And as the years are going on, we're getting more and more departments onto this project. So by communicating the results of this project, it actually really helped drive the success. The next project I'd like to talk about is recycling of food waste on site. So at BlueScope, we are encouraged to come forward with our own innovative ideas. And this is what I love about my job. I have a significant interest and love for the environment outside of work and inside of work. And I love bringing this energy into my workplace. One area I was quite interested in implementing was food organics, the recycling of food. So once in landfill, food waste breaks down and emits greenhouse gases, including not only carbon dioxide, but methane. And methane is approximately 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So it's a significant contributor to our global greenhouse gases. So the plan I had in place was to find a local food recycling facility. And I thought if I start off with the 4 canteens, so the site is that big. I think it's amazing we have 4 canteens. It's such a large place. But anyway, I thought if I started with the canteens, I could, you know, weave out any issues or any problems before implementing it, you know, site-wide into other buildings and departments and getting more people involved. So the results, again, were really, really good. We found Soilco, a company that was only located 10 kilometres from our steelworks. So that was great. They collect the food waste and they turn it into a reusable, resaleable soil mix. So in April 2019, I started the 4 canteens on the food recycling program. And what I also identified at the same time was that canteens didn't even have the yellow mixed recyclables bins in place. We couldn't believe it. They weren't recycling their egg cartons, their milk cartons, their tins of oil. I just couldn't believe it. So whilst putting in the green waste bins, I also got to ensure that now we have our mixed recyclables in place. The mixed recyclables avoided 1.2 tonnes of waste going to landfill each year. And the food waste is an astounding 46 tonnes now not going to landfill. In addition, the project went so well and runs so smoothly that we now have an additional 8 office buildings taking place and taking part of this wonderful project. That's about 600 employees from those buildings. And I obviously want this project to keep growing and, you know, go through the entire steelworks. That would be amazing. I guess the key learnings from this project was, whilst you're resolving one problem, you may identify other problems in place that you can solve at the same time, such as the recycling bins. I found that by getting a representative from each department they were interested, but getting them involved in the project ensured its success, because they're in those buildings day in and day out and can help make people aware, you know, what goes in which bin, and that the food waste is now an option to place food in. It also, I found that providing the figures of how many tonnes were reduced to landfill, that really, really got more people on board interested in that. And clear signage, again, I've said that before, but clear signage is so very important. You know, people get so confused. You've got 3, 4 different bins. They're like, what do I put in which bin? It's just easier to put it in the red general waste. Well, I made the signage very, very clear and made sure that people could just tell easily what to put in each bin. And it really has worked. It's amazing. Another project that I was fortunate to be part of, and this one's a little bit different. It was really exciting to be part of, and it's called the Global Side Protector Reuse Project. As you can see there's a photo of a coil, and on the side is some core flute black plastic. Now that just protects the coil during transport. We transport these coils all over Australia, but we also send them to Steelscape, which is a BlueScope company in Kalama, North America. Once these black plastic side protectors are removed, they're actually disposed of into landfill in America. So they dispose of approximately 20 tonnes per year, because there was no domestic outlet for this material to be recycled. However, here in Australia, these side protectors are reused and recycled. The ones that we can't reuse, we actually send back to the manufacturer for recycling. So I thought, let's put a project in place. Surely we can do something better than sending 20 tonnes to landfill when we've got our solution here in Australia. So I worked together with Steelscape, and all we did was Zoom. We used Zoom for meetings. I didn't go to America, they didn't come here. We just did a few setup meetings over Zoom to go, can we do this? Is this project viable to send these side protectors back? Well, guess what? It was. So we're actually Steelscape. Now they collect and store and they ship the sidewall protectors back to Australia for reuse. This is avoiding the 20 tonnes of plastic from going to landfill. Of those side protectors that come back, around 80% we reuse. The remaining 20% we send back to the manufacturer for recycling. The project was actually commended with a highly commended award, which was amazing. I was stoked about that. We have environment awards here at BLUESCOPE, and yeah, this project got the highly commended award. And believe it or not, this was actually a cash positive project. By sending the protectors all the way back to Australia by ship, we actually make money on this project because each individual side protector to purchase brand new was obviously costly. So it's really easy to get projects over the line when you're making money, even if they're cost neutral. But an amazing, amazing result. And I found that you can actually have cross-functional and cross-business collaboration to ensure this project was a success. I have a link to a YouTube video, which I'm not going to play now, but if you get access to this presentation, there's a link to a YouTube video. It's only a couple minutes long and it's a little bit of a wrap up of the whole side protector project. The last project I want to talk about today, I could go all day, mind you, but we'll stop here soon. So I've got the tyre recycling project. So currently we had some tyres from heavy machinery currently stored with no solution for disposal. The process though, this was a historical practice. Currently we don't do storage of tyres. When tyres get changed out now, they leave the site for recycling straight away, but there was an area on site which just had this historical, I guess, stockpile of tyres. So I thought, I want to do something with these. Surely we can send them off for recycling. So I sourced a company that could recycle the tyres. And to date, we've had 72 tonnes of tyres being sent to Tyre Cycle for recycling. And they're not that far, they're only about an hour away from the site. So it worked out really well. They have a fantastic recycling facility, which ensures the end use of the tyres are sustainable. So the tyres are processed into a range of rubber granules and fine powders. And the end use product is they use them in athletics tracks, some civil engineering for drainage aggregates, drain construction, marine matting, playground surfaces. And yeah, it's a fantastic project. The thing with this project is it wasn't cost neutral and it wasn't profitable. It actually did cost the company money to dispose of the tyres and recycle them. But the thing we focus on here is it was an environmentally positive outcome. It did take persistence. It took me about 2 years of continually bringing up this project, saying, come on, we've got to do this great thing. We can recycle these tyres. They're just sitting there. Anyway, I got the project through, so I was pretty happy about that. Up to our summary. So overall, I guess the key learnings for project success, for what I've experienced, was finding key personnel to help spread the word, to ensure not only implementation of the projects, but to ensure the continued success once implemented. I guess I was a little bit sneaky, or I don't know, maybe I'm a bit clever, who knows, but what I did was when people would email me, say, oh, great project on the food waste, I thought, oh, they must be interested. They must really like this. So then I'd speak to them and I'd say, oh, thanks. And would you like to start that in your building? And actually it did. It was easier then to spread the word, I guess, and get some champions to promote this positive project throughout the site. So I find if you have people that really have an interest or even a passion, or they just know that it's a feel-good project, great for the environment, you get more people on board, it makes it so much easier to be successful. So persistence, you can probably tell I'm a bit persistent, but continually driving the facts and figures forward to management to achieve a positive environmental outcome, even when the projects may be cost neutral, cost negative. Persistence does pay off. So overall, last financial year, 81 projects were completed, and they were just the waste ones. And we diverted approximately 3,200 tonnes of waste from going to landfill. Improvement projects in reducing waste to landfill, energy and water saving, they play such a vital role in every employee's key role objectives. It's just a great company to work for and be part of this, and be part of an amazing, I just guess, company that they just push these projects. You have to do them. They're part of your job. I love it. It's fantastic. All right, well, that's me. So, yeah, any questions, I guess?
Thank you, Cherie. There are a couple of questions starting to come through. But that's, yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I think so, you know, we don't get to hear these sorts of insights. And I think if every large workplace had leadership like yours, and persistence and enthusiasm, that is contagious. And, you know, every workplace can make an impact, no matter how big or small, schools, universities. So thank you very much for sharing all of that.
That's okay.
So Evelyn Delu had a question around monitoring the actual waste stream. And if you've followed that through and ascertained that what you've put in the bin for recycling actually makes it to a recycling centre. So she just pointed out that we know a lot of materials that are recyclable still don't end up getting repurposed. So have you been able to look at that?
Yeah, so what we do is we do have a waste contractor, and the contract that we have with that company ensures that not only our wastes are just picked up and collected and taken off site, but we do look into making sure that where our waste streams are taken, we are doing, I guess we are recycling or reusing, and we are working with our local, I don't know if I can say who we use, but anyway, one of our companies that we use for our dry industrial materials, for example, we are working closely with them. We go on site and audit those facilities as well. I've been to a couple of their sites just to make sure we know exactly what they do recycle and reuse and what they can't. And then the items that we may send to them and we think we're going recycled, we're working with the companies to make sure that we can find other outlets. There are other options, that we're not just ignoring it, that the waste has left the site and it's out of sight. It's not out of sight, out of mind. We are always working continuously on trying to reduce the waste to landfill. Unfortunately, there is not a solution for every single waste stream, but hopefully one day we'll get there.
Thank you. There's one around the food waste, and I think this is just such a huge issue. I think I was in a forum the other week, and it was something like globally 35% of climate emissions come from food waste.
Yes.
And that if, you know, an average Australian shopper was to walk out of the supermarket with 5 grocery bags and they happened to drop one in the car park, they wouldn't even bother to pick it up. And that one bag represents the amount of food waste in just, you know, I've got a compost bin and a worm farm and I still can't keep up. So I can't wait for Wollongong to get FOGO happening next month. But I digress. Question from Queen again from Uncle Paringa around whether or not you've looked at reducing the actual production of food waste in the canteens.
Oh, you know, I haven't looked at that. I haven't spoken to them about that. You know, I guess they do a lot of the food is just to order. So at our canteens on site, you just order. They only pre-make a few sandwiches and that's what they do. And I think too, also at the end of the day, I do know that we donate, one of the gentlemen does donate the food to, you know, a homeless hub, but it's not a whole heap of food pre-cooked to order. So I guess that does help, but I could definitely look into that as well and just see if there is much food waste.
Great. There's a question here from George Takax. Did you want to say anything about BLUESCOPE'S PPA for renewable energy?
Oh, see, that's not my field. There's, you know, this company is such a massive place. There's so many people employed in environment, you know, there's at least 15 of us. So resource energy and climate change and projects like that, I'm not the expert on those. I guess if you want some more information, the sustainability report amazing. And if you can go online to the BLUESCOPE'S website, there is some other information there that could help you out. Yeah, sorry, I can't answer that much to do with the energy.
That's okay. There's probably a couple more. I don't know if you can see those questions.
Okay, I've just opened
may
those
not
up.
also be your bag.
Maybe not.
Nick's just asking around the move to carbon neutral steel production,
Yes.
such as the hydrogen production planned at Port KEMBLA. And so does BLUESCOPE have plans to move in that direction?
Well, look, they're really, we've got like members and employees that are continually working on reduction of, you know, energy and working forward to reduce our emissions and reduce our energy consumption. I don't know, I can't recite what is exactly in place at the moment, but again, yeah, if they want more information, you know, offline, I can get some information for them.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't answer all your questions.
No, that's okay. And there's probably a similar one there around the move in Europe for green steel futures. So we might defer that one too to collect
yes.
a comprehensive answer for Lena, who's asked that question, and get that back to you. And I'll also make Cherie's presentation available for everybody so you can click through to those videos and also the sustainability report.
Fantastic.
We've got another question from one of the students that are tuning in. Do you think that it is up to corporations such as BLUESCOPE and entrepreneurs to fund and implement responsible sustainability action in the wider community?
Well, I think, you know, I think if BLUESCOPE can show and demonstrate how serious we are about the environment and our sustainability, I feel that, you know, we can help, I guess, influence the community. I don't know if I'm answering that question correct, but I feel like if a big company like BLUESCOPE can show what they can do to make a positive change towards a sustainable practice and be, you know, amazing for the environment, I think we can share that and community can learn from it, and hopefully, you know, they take, I guess, our learnings and implement them themselves.
I would agree with that. I think that's and that's partly why I've, you know, invited you. I wanted to kind of have a broader, you know, representation at the table. It involves all of us, and in terms of Healthy Cities' role, we do need to work with industry to find sustainable solutions. I mean, we need still to fund our public transport infrastructure, for example. So you know, we're all sort of interconnected, and I definitely think the community awareness of steps that, you know, if they can see a big company making steps and demonstrating a real impact, you know, then anyone can do it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think the greatest threat to our planet is the fact that people believe it's someone else can save it, someone else can fix it. Yeah.
And we have one last question here from actually one of our next speakers, Associate Professor Shell Chi. Wondering if there's any opportunities for university students to take internships or placements.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I know that every year, you know, BLUESCOPE is really, really good at, we take on cadets every year. You know, I'm not sure how many, maybe 20 or 30 or so. We take cadets on and help them go through university, and they work as well. You know, look, the opportunities exist all the time. You know, we're very flexible here and very welcoming. So, yeah, it wouldn't take much just to inquire. I wouldn't say no. The answer is not no, but yeah, definitely, yeah, call and see who can help you out.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Oh, there's one more. But yeah, there's lots of thanks on the chat for you, Cherie. There's one final reflection.
Yes.
It's really great that industry, this is from Evelyn Delude, every industry has taken small steps towards ecological and social sustainability. Does BLUESCOPE lobby its industry colleagues to follow its lead?
Industry colleagues, like who would that be?
Maybe other steel producers? Or?
Other steel producers, yeah. Oh, look, I'm not too sure. I really don't know. I mean, I know we get involved in the community and we involve other corporations, you know, the coal terminal and the harbour group, and we're, you know, we meet with them on a regular basis. Yeah, I'm not sure. Look, it's such a massive company. I know I keep saying it, but with thousands of employees, there's so many different jobs and so many people interacting with others and other companies. I'm sure we do learn off others, and, you know, and probably have regular forums with them as well.
Thank you, Cherie. Thanks so much for your time.
It's okay. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Okay, we might get ready to hear from our final speakers. So we have a dual presentation from Professor Thomas Astle-Burt from the University of Wollongong, and Associate Professor Shel Chi, who is from the University of New South Wales. And Thomas is the Professor of Population Health and Environmental Data Science, and the founding co-director of the Population Wellbeing and Environment Research Lab at UOW. I might get him to give further introduction, because it's a long-standing research career he's had with the relationship between nature, so, you know, the greening and our environment and ecology with human health. And I think it's timely also looking at the Premier's priorities this year with all the greening and the access to green space within very, you know, short walking parameters of urban environments. And Associate Professor Shel Chi is an NHMRC Career Development Fellow at the University of New South Wales School of Population Health, and an Adjunct Professor at the National Institute of Environmental Health at China CDC. So she leads a program of research focused on enhancing population well-being through identifying modifiable environmental factors. So for example, the postcode disadvantage that Ian spoke about, urban green space and food environments that shape health and development inequities. So I will allow them to share their screens and hand over to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Can you see my screen? I just shared it, I hope.
Yep, we can see it.
Great, awesome. So I will start and then hand over to Thomas. Thank you very much for inviting us, and it's great to hear Ian and Chesh's presentations as well. So today we're going to talk about, you know, why the Illawarra, if it could be more greener, and then we'll have a healthier communities. So we're going to have 4 parts. Our presentation, roughly about 20 minutes, and we'll start to talking about increasing recognition of green space and health benefits. I think this is really important, because only if we could recognize it, and then this is more likely to happen. I think in the last 6 months, especially around March and April, all of us, if we live in Sydney and NSW, we probably have been locked down and stayed in home most of the time. And it was really nice for me, had opportunities to walk to my local park to visit. In the morning, sometimes I go in there to do a bit of running, and in the afternoon, after I finish all my Zoom meetings, it's a nice day, I will go out to walk my little dog and seeing children play on the grass. And even I'm not really talking to people, but just seeing people, you know, around in the park and listening, you know, the bird sounds, and I just feel much more relaxed, and I also feel I'm still connected with people, not be lonely. And I think this is reflects some of the potential health benefits that the park gives to us. Not only just you know, I seeing that, and you may have the experience about it, but also UN have these sustainable development goals, and you probably know this quite well. And you may notice that the number 11, and it's very close to what we talk about today. And the UN aim by 2030 will provide universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public space, particularly for women and children, older persons, and persons with disability. I'm so glad that UN is promote that and is for green and public spaces. And we know that's how important that if everyone could access to those green and public space. Not only UN, but also WHO is working on that. This is just some report they have done, and urban spaces and health, and also prestige universities like Harvard, quite a few of our work has also been cited in both of the reports. And also WHO have guidelines talking about how we could best use the green space and benefit our health. And that's really great news. And on the other side, we are also very glad that when Wollongong Council is developing this urban greening strategy, they consulted us and we were able to contribute to this important 20 years greening strategy. And this is just some of the work that was used for this strategy report. And I guess the second part is I want to mention, and also Kelly mentioned as well, that there are major urban greening efforts underway in our own state and in our country. So NSW government committed investing more green space and open space in Sydney. And in fact, they are investing over 290 million and announced in 2018. And during pandemic, and I remembered that Victoria government also committed just over $150 million to upgrade their local parks because they realize how important this is for us. And Kelly mentioned, and I just want to show here again, the two primary priorities are within 10 minutes walk from our home, we're going to potentially have more green space, and also our cities and going to have more tree canopies. And there are 5 million trees and going to plant for a greener Sydney by 2030. And I don't know whether you know this news, and at the moment, the Department of Planning is giving free trees for, give the tree for free. It's not those really tall trees at the moment. They are still small in a small pot, but you can go into their website and to have a selection. There's quite a lot of varieties you can select from, and even including our favorite jacaranda trees. And then you can pick up them from Bunnings and plant in your backyard. So this might be something you want to do during the weekend. So we're now talking about, WHO, UN, they really promote about greener cities and the health benefits. And also our government are putting major green infrastructures. And so what exactly, linking the green space and health together? And that's where our research comes in. We also have this question too. Go back several years ago, Thomas and I worked with a group of researchers from all over the world who also conducting research on green space and health, and also widely about environment and health. So we think potentially there are 3 major pathways linking the green space and health together. One is where restoration, and the other is building capacity, and then finally is reducing the harm. So when we talk about restoration, this is where, we talk about, like earlier, I said, when you go into a park and you feel much more relaxed. It could be just because, you see the tree and the very relaxed color, variety in the park, listen to the bird song, fresh air. And so all this will help you relax. And that's really good for our mental health. And the second pathway is building capacities, such as some of us, when we're going to the park, we're doing physical activities, which is really going to be good for our physical health. But many times, when we go to park, we're not going there alone. We're going there with our friends, our family. We have a nice chat and walk around or sitting on the grass or meeting new friends. And this will help us building our social capitals and help us feel less lonely. And this is going to be good for our mental and physical health. And finally, we think the third pathway is reducing the harm, where you have certain amount of green space or maybe certain type of green space. It could help us to reduce the harm on our health, such as fresher air, reduce air pollution, and also provide a cooling air during the heat wave days. So I'm now going to show you some of the research we have done and looking about green space and health over the life course. I'm going to talk about the first half from the baby and all the way to adult, and Thomas will from the mid-age and to older time. So this is a systematic review and a meta-analysis done by our PhD student, Celine. So if you're not familiar about what is systematic review, I'll just say this in short. Essentially, what we have done is we're looking about the research have done in many countries who published their research in English journals in the last 10 years on green space and health. And we want to say what they find, and we all find a similar story, and or someone find differently, and what their studies designed. The overall what we find is that among all those studies, the general trend is that the young moms who live in closer to green space, they tend to have a healthier baby when the baby born. And I think that's really great news. And not only this is applied for the baby when they just born, and this is done by our PhD student, Eddie, and looking about green space and prosocial behavior among children and adolescents. So what we find is that children living closer to green space, they tend to have more prosocial behavior, which I'm not surprised. As mentioned earlier, the 3 pathway. When there are green space available, public available green space, children more likely to go in there to play. And this is where they could have social interaction and develop their social skills. And except that we're looking a lot of, the literature and what other people have done, we also conducted this serious research, used large data available in Australia and some particular available in NSW. So there's some studies we have done using the longitudinal study of Australian children. What we found from this study is that boys living with areas 10% more green space, they tend to do more physical activity and also light screen time, which I think is fantastic news, and that's for our boys. We did not find this for our girls. We are also wondering why. Is that because the parents worried about the safety issue around the park or inside of the park, or maybe the facilities in the park was not quite attract the girls to use? We don't have the answer yet, but we have a newly funded research, and which we're hoping that we could look at this a little bit more in details, which I will mention about this project later. And we also find that children who are living with more green space, particularly 20 to 40%, they tend to have better mental health. And also, if children living always with high quality of green space, their mental health well-being is better than the ones who are living with poor quality of green space. As you can see from the chart from the beginning, but also when our children grow up, you can see this mental health well-being gap is actually widened. And the kids who are living with high quality of green space, their mental health well-being seems a lot better than their peers who are living with low quality of green space. Now, I want to ask you a question. What is a high quality green space mean? And I hope that you could think about it, and we'll go back this later. We also find that moms who are living with high quality green space, they tend to have lower odds of developing psychological distress, which I think this is fantastic news. But again, I'm not surprised. Imagine even only the park is high quality. Our young moms are more likely to going to visit and doing physical activities and going there, see their friends, or making new friends with other young moms. And that will help them to have a better mental health well-being. Well, now I over the presentation to Thomas.
Thanks, Xiao. I'm just going to request a remote control so I can flick through the slides as well. So let's see if that works.
Yep.
Yep, great. Okay, well, this is the first time I've done it, so thank you for your patience. So then, oh, there we go. Great. So from middle age and up, this is the research that we've been doing. And I just want to pick up on the point that Xiaoqi made around the quantity and the quality. As our understandings of quality green space evolve, it's becoming much clearer that this is strongly related to our preferences, our needs, our desires, what we want to do, what we regard as flourishing in each of our own lives. So green space quality is very much about what you want to get out of the experience when you go there. And for some people, that's shade. For others, it may be bird song, bit of biodiversity. A lot of these things may imply particular types of green space may be important, especially for our health. So we've been doing exactly that. We've looked at different types of green space and how they relate to our mental health in cities of Sydney and Wollongong and Newcastle, using a very large sample of people in the 45 and up study. And what we found was really interesting. We found people who have more tree canopy specifically nearby, within about a mile walk or 1.6 kilometers, more tree canopy specifically reduces the risk of developing poor mental health over approximately about 6 years' time. So green space, good. Tree canopy, especially good. And I'm waiting for the slide to change. There we go. It's a little bit of a delay. What we also find is that this may be related to how physically active we happen to be. Now, in general terms, the more physically active we tend to be, the better our mental health. But when we interact that physical activity with green space, what we find also is that there's some form of modification going on. There's an interaction wherein if you're physically active, good. But if you're physically active, when there's green space nearby, you're going for a run in the park rather than going for a run in the gym, you get greater returns on your investment. And I guess I don't want to discourage anybody from going to the gym, but it seems to me you could save a lot of money and maybe get more bang for your buck if you go for a run in the park rather than a run in the gym. But that's just me. Now, we already know that Australia and many other countries around the world has a challenge of loneliness. Xiaoqi mentioned loneliness earlier. It may be that this is becoming ever more so an issue for us during the time of COVID. Now, loneliness isn't just not having anybody nearby to talk to, but it's also the feeling of loneliness. Robin Williams is meant to have said this, and I quote, "I used to think that the worst thing in life was to end up alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is to end up with people who make you feel alone. It's the feeling of loneliness, of detachment, of not having those relationships, the quality of relationships that you desire, which would nourish your life." So we looked at this, and we looked at this across all of the major cities across the whole of Australia. And what we found was people who have more green space nearby, within a mile walk from home, tend to have a low risk of becoming lonely over the course of about 4 years. That's in general, and it's taken into account other factors that you'd expect to be relevant, like the amount of income one has at their disposal, age, gender, and a whole heap of other things too. And here's the especially interesting thing. We found more powerful impacts of green space potentially among people who are living alone, who we know are at a higher risk of feeling lonely over time. So investments in green space, we know, can help us stay connected, but also then can help us have more enriching, nourishing relationships which stem and help us to avoid loneliness, especially if we are indeed living on our own. Now, green space, good for health, good for running around in, exerting some energy, feeling a little bit tired at the end of the day, and perhaps it's absolutely no surprise at all that we also find green space is associated with a reduced risk of short sleep, as demonstrated here by our wonderful koala friend here. We find in particular that folks in Wollongong, in Newcastle, and in Sydney who have 30% or more tree canopy within a mile walk from home tend to have 22% lower odds of insufficient sleep. Wow, that is really great news. And for many people, this may be somewhat new. Mental health, good. Physical activity, intuitive. Sleep, huh, okay, well, this is new. But why is sleep important for our health? Isn't this just a bonus result? No, this could actually be fundamentally important for promoting health in our communities. Better sleep, longer sleep. Why? Here's why. Well, hopefully every single one of us looked like this while we were sleeping last night. Some of us who are preparing presentations may have been looking a little bit like this, and you may be familiar when there's some sort of big pressure thing happening the next day. Maybe it's difficult to get to sleep or whatever it may be. As we know, the day after a poor night's sleep isn't necessarily our most productive days at work. And of course, it isn't great for our levels of mental health, our levels of irritability, which of course can lead to not great relationships. We can potentially jump out at friends when they're just trying to be nice because we just haven't had enough sleep and we're feeling irritable. None of that is good for our mental health. And of course, staying up all night ends up with changing our eating patterns. We can end up eating the wrong things at the midnight or even later or even earlier in the day perhaps. Eating the wrong things in the middle of the night isn't necessarily good for our waistlines and influences on our mental health, on our social relationships, on our diet and on our waistlines. None of that is good for our heart. So as you can see here, it all links up in a very systematic way, and maybe promoting more green space can help us keep a healthier heart from improving our mental health, improving our physical activity, and also improving our sleep quality. And this is where it all feeds into, again, with the same people in Sydney, in Wollongong, in Newcastle. We find those of us who have more tree canopy nearby have a lower risk of developing heart disease over a period of 6 years. And what is more, a lower risk of developing hypertension and type 2 diabetes. We're not doing particularly well at preventing a lot of these things. We are investing huge amounts of money in various different prevention initiatives, and we should not stop that. But we also shouldn't neglect the role of investing in quality urban environments as a way to also improve our health and prevent us from developing these horrible diseases too. Environment has an important role to play. Hot off the press, because a lot of that was published earlier this year and we haven't stopped, we've not rested on our laurels, we've still been working hard. Here's some new results that we've found. More tree canopy nearby in particular, those of us in Sydney, Wollongong and Newcastle tend to have better memory, lower risk of developing subjective memory complaints, and more likely to report that we have excellent levels of memory. That's a fabulous result, and you might think that that may potentially feed into cognitive health and potential prevention of dementia further down the line, and I'm pleased to report that is what we're finding in our most recent study published just a couple of weeks ago. A reduced risk of developing dementia over a period of about 8 or 9 years for those of us who have more tree canopy nearby too. As we know, dementia, we don't have a cure yet. We don't even have particularly effective long-term treatments. So we can leave no stone unturned in order to improve our chances of living a life as cognitively healthy as we possibly can, free of dementia where that is possible. Investing in green space may be a part of that wider solution. Job done. Maybe. I'll hand over to Xiaoqi to bring us home.
Great, thanks, Thomas. Well, you may feel that, okay, WHO, UN have all this health promotion, and our government is also doing something, seems quite good. And also research shows that green space benefits our health. So job done, we should go out, have a cup of tea and cheer it up. But from my view, I don't think the job done yet, because if you look at these maps on this screen that we produced several years ago, what this told us that the areas with the dark green color, it shows that those people living in these 5 major metropolitan cities in Australia, they tend to have more green space access. We are talking about within their home, 20 minutes walk, 1.6 km, 60% or more green space around them. But on the other side, you can say there are some areas it's kind of like a white color or very light green. Those are the people who are living with this kind of similar distance in their neighborhood, but with nothing of green space to access or very little. But meanwhile, on the other side, if you look at these slides, it shows that the areas with a more low-income household tend to, in general, have less green space to access. And given we learned all the potential benefits that green space can bring to us, and I would question and also wondered where all those 5 million trees going to go, and where are all those parks and the new upgraded or new parks and going to be? Are they going to be in those very green areas, and or they are going to be in the areas which now looks a bit white color or light green, and or in the areas where we have a really fast population develop? So we don't know any of this. And also that I really like what William Blake said here. The tree which moves some to tears of joy is, in the eyes of others, only a green thing that stands in the way. Well, to me, is that green space quality means very different to different people. Just look at this picture. Well, some of you think, yeah, this looks great. I can go to walk my dog and maybe running around just outside of this park. But to some other people, they will say, well, you know what, I don't like this park because it has dogs in it. I would like to run inside of the park, but clearly this park doesn't look like designed. I can run inside and I could only run around it. So what kind of park quality we need? That's the question earlier I asked you. I don't know at the moment whether there is one of the high quality of the park in your mind, and what things you would be count as high quality, and what things will stop you to going to use the park. So with that in our mind, and we put an application last year, and very luckily we get funded by NHMRC, Australian National Health and Medical Research Council, and UKRI, working with colleagues from UK, Glasgow University, and also colleagues from UNSW, UOW, and also Queensland University and the CSIRO. And we're going to investigate what kind of green space quality we need that help us to prevent a mental health and have a healthier heart. And we are going to have our first focus group interview very soon, hopefully earlier next year. So I'm wondering if you're interested in this topic, because please join us. We're going to have 3 groups. One is going to be the policymakers. So, for example, people working in Department of Planning who making those urban greening policies. And we're also going to have another focus group with providers such as nursery industries. And also the 3rd group is going to be the community users. Very important, because by the end of the day, we want to learn what are the high quality parks to you, and what will promote you to use the park, and what are the barriers. So if you're interested to be one of those groups that you think you should, please feel free to contact me, and this is my email address. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. That was really, really lovely. Actually, I feel really enlightened when I see all the green and hear about the green. And there's been some really engaging sort of comments going on in the chat, and more sort of conversation and discussion rather than too many questions at the moment. But I might kick off with one from Kathy Rice, who's just saying, you know, she understands the drive for increased urban tree canopy based on the recognition that we need shade, you know, for our cities and the health consequences of climate change. But how do we encourage people to revere trees rather than being afraid of falling branches or loss of views? And I think that's really sort of timely after the heartbreaking tree vandalism that's been going on in Wollongong recently. Do you have any opinion on that?
I think obviously the trees have a lot of health benefits, and I also know that sometimes to people it could be a hassle. So for example, like trees may be quite end of their life and they might have been invaded by termites, right? It have maybe risked people's life. This is where I think we really need have regular check and have certain regulations and policies to looking about to address it. So it shouldn't be like people feel afraid of trees. I think one really good example is probably Singapore. When I visited Singapore and I learned from the researcher there, and they told me that each of the tree in their country actually have a special, like a barcode. And so they really know everything about the tree when they grow planted and the life expectancy. So they could accordingly and to address it. But I'm not sure, I really don't think we actually have this kind of tree record within a council, and which also make it a little bit more difficult to organize. And I guess the other thing is that what kind of trees we should plant and for our purpose, and where we should plant the tree, and then make sure, if possible, that we could get the benefits and less about the hassle.
I would come in as well and say that green space quality, as we mentioned, is about people's preferences and ideas, and that doesn't mean everybody's going to like every single type of green space that's available. But in order to green effectively, we need to consult. We need to bring everybody on board and respect everybody's opinion, and understand that maybe some people may not revere trees to the extent that others do, but we need to understand why and listen, so we can develop urban greening strategies that do cater for everyone, and everyone sees that there's some benefit for them and for their families. That's the only way that we can make sure that this does benefit everyone in the future, by bringing everyone on board.
So perhaps like inherent in that quality of green space is the variety of green space too, because there was a little bit of discussion on the chat around the natural green vegetation, indigenous vegetation, not necessarily like in a structured playground or park, but just weaving through more natural green spaces through whatever corridors we can find. So a variety of different spaces for different purposes and audiences probably contributes to the quality of green spaces in communities. I'm just having another little look. There's lots of people are very, I guess, motivated and inspired by your presentation. There's one on top of one on top.
The network part of the green space is really important, because in rapidly urbanizing areas where we've got new apartment blocks going up and various things, we don't want to lose green space, but we also need to sometimes take into account that a new very large green space isn't always going to be practical. So how can we link up and use the smaller green spaces in different ways to ensure that they provide a range of opportunities across the whole community?
There was a tricky one, not tricky, but Nick from Kiama, he likes the tricky ones. He's just making the point around the New South Wales government are investing in green spaces, and that's kind of the rhetoric we're hearing, but they're also at the same time supporting the acceleration of land clearing and loss of native vegetation. He's pointing out there's been a lot in the last 18 months or so in terms of the broad history of land clearing in New South Wales. So macro habitat loss is accelerating the destruction of the biosphere, and I suppose he's just pointing out the contradiction maybe from a government point of view, where they're planting and talking about green spaces and yet the land clearing and development still happening.
Yeah, well, I guess I have to say thanks, you know, Nick, the comments, and just saying, you know, there are two sides of things that are going on. I guess I don't have more details about what Nick described here, but I just wish that, you know, our research and other people's research around the green space and health, and if you need that to say guard some of the green space land that have, and hopefully those could helpful, because a lot of time I could understand that green space is very expensive to maintain, and we did have conversations with councils, and people say, what other values except it looks good and can provide to us? And our research and many other people's research in the world as well shows that there are strong health benefits, and that's why we should keep them. So that's what I just want to say. Yeah, thank you.
We also need to think about the value of green spaces from both their benefits and disbenefits type of things. So I understand that for roads over a certain speed, I think it's 60 kilometers per hour, street trees nearby could be seen as risks for potential collisions by errant vehicles. So that's one thing, and that's prioritizing the vehicle, and that's prioritizing the vehicle over the pedestrian who's walking along the side of the road without any shade from the sun as well. So what we got to think about here is, what are the total benefits that trees in particular bring to us, and ensure that we are utilizing our public spaces in a way which make them more walkable, places for everyone to benefit, and we're promoting people, not necessarily cars. And I feel that it's a bit the other way at the moment, but we can change that together.
And that's probably a really great platform for Healthy Cities, I think, to look more into not only people, pedestrians, but cyclists. And I know there's a lot of kind of people looking at walkability and interconnectivity to try and sustain the really positive behaviours we've seen during COVID, or people getting out walking in their own neighbourhoods and so forth. There was a question in there. We've still got a little bit of time for one or two more questions before we wrap up. It was from someone, I don't know who, Griffith, it could be Claudia, and she's asking around your explanation for tree canopy as an important factor for health. Is it relative to middle-class Western values and urban lifestyle? What about in a poorer country, semi-rural township with a lot of green space already? Would your analysis still apply?
Great question, and we're the first people in the world to have done this type of work. So you could say that the research coming out of Wollongong and Sydney and Newcastle is pioneering in that regard. So whether tree canopy would be relatively as valuable for health in other countries, in other very different socioeconomic circumstances, is, I think, still open for discussion. And indeed, we have colleagues in other countries who are actively taking up the baton to answer those very questions. But we have looked at this within our own patch and examined this with regards to things like income and education. And we found that the benefits are generally the same, whether you have a higher or lower education, a higher or lower annual household income, working, retired, older, younger. We find that people with more tree canopy nearby tend to do better than those who don't. And that's a really important part, because trees are hugely important for conserving biodiversity. So it's not just us who are benefiting, but all animal life in the world will benefit from us restoring those trees too. So we've got to think about the health of the entire planet, and this is something that we can do together.
Yeah, I agree with Thomas. You know, so Ian said the future is something we are creating. That's from Ian's presentation, and I totally agree that we need to create the future together, and hopefully it's a better and a great and a greener future. But just going back to this question from I think the Griffith University participant, that because now I can see the question. So I want to say, you know, why the tree canopy you ask could be important factors for health. Especially like in Australia, you can imagine, you know, even we have a lot of green, but if we don't have tree canopies, in a hot day, you probably don't want walk on the same walk path. But if you have the tree canopies, and it's really good that you probably want to go out to work, and because it provides a shade and cooling the air. And I want to mention one of our PhD students actually conducted some research in the developing country as well. Didn't look at the tree canopy, but look at the green space in general. And it shows that, you know, even if in developing country, that is still really good for people's health. But I do agree that we probably, hopefully, either our team or the local teams in those countries could have a look whether tree canopies and have some health benefits, extra health benefits to the people living in developing countries or cities.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's probably, there's some really interesting conversations in the chat which people can see, and Alyssa's typing madly beside me, so we'll try and get out sort of a summary of Q&As and other resources that people are sharing. George might have some time to find an interesting reference he's alluding to there around reduced aggression, including domestic violence in the United States due to urban greening. And Lena has also shared a link where you can leave public comment, I think, for a New South Wales government charter. What's that about? About public space definitions and 30 kilometre speed limits in neighbourhood streets as well. So thank you very much, Thomas and Shoji. I might hand over to Sandra McCarthy now, who's the chair of Healthy Cities Illawarra and also the secretariat for the Australian chapter of the Alliance, just to wrap up. Thanks,
yes, good morning, everyone, and a big thank you to all of the participants involved with Healthy Cities and the Alliance for Healthy Cities, and here representing the Australian chapter. Look, firstly, a big round of applause to the CEO of Illawarra Healthy Cities Illawarra, Kelly Andrews, for her excellent organisation and being able to attract the high quality and calibres of speakers here for this presentation today. I've noticed Evelyn's put up the little yellow hand. How about we just throw up a whole lot of yellow hands and show our appreciation to Kelly and all of the Healthy Cities Illawarra staff. Thank you. And with just a wrap up and summary, I think we've been incredibly fortunate to have Professor Ian Lowe here today, an absolutely inspiring presentation, which was, most important, validated by evidence. It reminded us all that as our cities are becoming so populated, that we need to limit growth. And I thought what was impressive was to actually, and for those such as myself that have been part of the Healthy Cities movement for a long time, to see that rework of the Healthy Cities model, where the larger circle encompasses all of the factors, and that how important is that the natural systems give us the things that we really need. So thank you very much, Ian. To Cherie Samet from BLUESCOPE, and with the foundation of Healthy Cities Illawarra, actually it was founded with one of its first projects was with BLUESCOPE at Illawarra, and it was working to reduce environmental air pollution. So it was wonderful to see the progress of that corporate industry, the presentation of 5 interesting case studies, and also impressive to see with the global partnership with the TYRE recycling project. And the lesson from that today with Cherie and a young person embarking with this work is the power of persistence, because often with good public policy, it just doesn't happen overnight. You need to do the research, collect and collate your data, and provide that evidence to the decision makers. So very well done. And finally, with Professor Thomas Astle-Burt and Associate Professor Shelfie, Greener Illawarra and Healthier Communities. It's been quite a contentious issue with the Illawarra, with the loss of large growth and older specimens just recently, heritage trees with the Wollongong Basin, and just the importance and the great value of neighbourhood green space and your local park, particularly of those physical health benefits, environmental benefits, but most importantly, as we're going through our living situations and our daily lives with this pandemic, the importance of those social connections, and also that the emerging health problem of people feeling lonely. It was wonderful to actually see the contributions from Evelyn and the chats, the fact that there's going to be further research, and we all have an opportunity to be part of that and contribute to actually developing some really good public policy, because particularly with local government, the public policy in regard to green open space with increasing urban development, also removal of trees, there needs to be a lot further work to actually tighten up those policies with implementations from local councils and local government. So I think we all came away with enormous value of the benefits of green space, but also I think I've been heartened today to still remain very committed to the work we do as the champions for healthy cities. So thank you everyone for your presentation here today, your participation in this forum, and I think we all owe ourselves to go out into this beautiful sunshine and let's go for a walk in our own local park. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sandra. That was beautifully wrapped up. I won't hold anyone up any further. Thank you so much for coming online. And it's given me a lot of motivation actually to repeat this. I think we'll keep the momentum and just generate a broader community, and who knows what little projects will come out of today. So thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Goodbye, everyone.